Welcome to Dreamtale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is The Dancing Refrigerator. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly, 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle fade-away melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Soon the music will shift into soothing alpha wave tones, carrying you toward a calm shoreline of dreams. Keep your eyes closed, or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. The Dancing Refrigerator begins now, and when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. The Dancing Refrigerator. Fred was not an ordinary refrigerator. He was old, white, and had been keeping food cold in the Johnson family's kitchen for 15 years. During the day, Fred did his job quietly, humming softly while keeping milk fresh and vegetables crisp. But when night came, something magical happened to Fred. It all started 3 months ago when Mrs. Johnson bought a new radio for the kitchen. The radio was small and silver, and it sat on the counter next to Fred. Every evening, Mrs. Johnson bought a new radio. Johnson would listen to music while cooking dinner. Fred loved the music, especially the jazz songs, with their smooth rhythms and dancing beats. One Tuesday night, after the Johnson family had gone to bed, Fred heard music coming from the radio. Someone had forgotten to turn it off completely, and soft jazz music was playing quietly in the dark kitchen. Fred felt something strange happening inside his metal body. His compressor began to vibrate in time with the music, and his ice maker started clicking like drums. Before Fred knew what was happening, he was moving. His heavy body swayed gently from side to side, following the rhythm of the music. It felt wonderful. Fred had never experienced anything like this before. The music made him feel alive and happy in a way he had never felt during his 15 years of keeping food cold. From that night on, Fred couldn't stop dancing. Every time music played in the kitchen, whether from the radio, the television in the next room, or even when someone hummed a tune, Fred would start moving. He learned to slide across the kitchen floor, spin in small circles, and even do a little shimmy that made his doors rattle cheerfully. The problem was that Fred weighed almost 300 pounds. And when he danced, he made noise. His movements caused his shelves to shake, his bottles to clink together, and his motor to hum louder than usual. Sometimes he would accidentally bump into the kitchen counter or knock over the salt and pepper shakers with his enthusiastic dancing. The first person to notice something strange was Tommy, the youngest Johnson child. Tommy was only 8 years old, and he often woke up at night to get a drink of water. One Thursday night, Tommy walked into the dark kitchen and saw Fred sliding across the floor to the sound of music from the radio. "Mom! Dad!" Tommy called, running back to his parents' bedroom. "The refrigerator is dancing." Mr. and Mrs. Johnson hurried to the kitchen, but by the time they arrived, Fred had stopped moving and was standing perfectly still in his usual spot. The radio was playing soft music, but there was no sign that Fred had been dancing. "Tommy, refrigerators don't dance," Mrs. Johnson said gently, patting her son's head. "You must have been dreaming. Let's get you back to bed." But Tommy knew what he had seen. The next morning at breakfast, he told his older sister Sarah about the dancing refrigerator. "That's impossible, Tommy," Sarah laughed. She was 12 years old and thought she knew everything. "Refrigerators are machines. They can't dance. You were probably sleepwalking." Tommy felt frustrated that no one believed him, but he decided to prove that Fred could dance. That night, he quietly snuck into the kitchen and hid behind the kitchen table. He waited patiently for something to happen. Around midnight, the neighbor's dog started barking, and someone turned on a radio in the apartment upstairs. The music was loud enough to hear through the ceiling, and suddenly, Fred began to move. Tommy watched in amazement as the big white refrigerator swayed back and forth, did a little spin, and even lifted one corner slightly off the ground in what looked like a dance step. Tommy was so excited that he forgot to stay hidden. He jumped up from behind the table and shouted, "I knew it! You can dance!" Fred was so surprised to see Tommy that he stopped dancing immediately and tried to pretend he had never moved. But it was too late. Tommy had seen everything. "Don't worry, Fred," Tommy whispered, walking closer to the refrigerator. "I won't tell anyone else. But why do you dance?" Of course, Fred couldn't answer because refrigerators can't talk. But Tommy seemed to understand anyway. "You love music, don't you?" Tommy said. "I love music too. Would you like to dance together?" Tommy turned on the kitchen radio very quietly and found a station playing gentle jazz music. He started moving to the rhythm, and after a moment, Fred joined in. They danced together in the quiet kitchen, Tommy with his small movements and Fred with his big, careful steps. This became their secret. Every few nights, Tommy would sneak into the kitchen and he and Fred would have their own private dance parties. Tommy learned Fred's favorite types of music: jazz, swing, and sometimes classical pieces with strong rhythms. Fred seemed happiest when they danced to upbeat songs that made his motor hum with joy. But Fred's dancing was becoming more difficult to hide. During the day, Mrs. Johnson started noticing that things in the kitchen were slightly out of place. The salt and pepper shakers would be in different positions, and sometimes she would find scuff marks on the kitchen floor that she couldn't explain. "That's strange," Mrs. Johnson said to her husband one morning. "I could have sworn I left the dish towel on the counter, but I found it on the floor this morning." Mr. Johnson suggested that maybe they had mice, so they set up some small cameras around the kitchen to see what was happening at night. Tommy knew about the cameras, and he tried to warn Fred by whispering to him, during the day. But Fred couldn't understand words, and he didn't know about the cameras. On Saturday night, there was a jazz festival on the radio that played music until very late. Fred couldn't resist the wonderful rhythms, and he began one of his best dance performances ever. He slid gracefully across the floor, spun in perfect circles, and even managed a move that looked like a refrigerator version of a tango. Unfortunately, Fred forgot about the cameras. The next morning, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson checked the camera recordings to see if they could find evidence of mice. Instead, they found something much more surprising. "George," Mrs. Johnson called to her husband, staring at the computer screen, "you need to see this." Mr. Johnson looked at the recording and couldn't believe his eyes. There was their refrigerator, clearly dancing to music from the radio. It swayed, spun, and moved across the kitchen floor with surprising grace for such a large appliance. "Well," Mr. Johnson said after a long moment of silence, "that's something you don't see every day." Sarah came into the room just as they were watching Fred do a particularly impressive spin. "Is that our refrigerator dancing?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with surprise. "It appears so," Mrs. Johnson replied, still staring at the screen. "Tommy was right," Sarah exclaimed. "He told us the refrigerator was dancing, but we didn't believe him." They called Tommy into the room and showed him the recording. Tommy grinned widely, but tried to look surprised. "Wow," he said. "I guess Fred really does like to dance." "Fred?" Mrs. Johnson asked. "That's what I call him," Tommy explained. "He seems like a Fred." The family spent the rest of the morning watching different recordings of Fred's nighttime dance performances. They saw him dancing to jazz, classical music, and even some rock and roll that had been playing on a neighbor's radio. "You know," Mr. Johnson said thoughtfully, "Fred has been a good refrigerator for 15 years. If he wants to dance at night, I don't see any harm in it." "But what if he breaks something?" Mrs. Johnson worried. "We could move some things out of his way," Sarah suggested. "Give him more room to dance. And maybe we could dance with him sometime," Tommy added hopefully. That evening, the Johnson family decided to have a family meeting with Fred. They gathered in the kitchen after dinner and explained that they knew about his dancing. "Fred," Mr. Johnson said, feeling a little silly talking to a refrigerator, "we know you like to dance, and that's okay with us. But we need to make sure you don't break anything or wake up the neighbors." Mrs. Johnson had moved the breakable items to higher shelves and pushed the kitchen table against the wall to give Fred more space. "We thought maybe you'd like to have a proper dance party," Mrs. Johnson said. Tommy turned on the radio and found a station playing swing music. The family started dancing, moving to the rhythm of the music. For a moment, Fred didn't move. He seemed shy about dancing in front of everyone. But then Sarah started doing some silly dance moves that made everyone laugh, and Tommy began spinning in circles. The music was so joyful, and the family looked so happy that Fred couldn't resist joining in. Slowly, Fred began to sway to the music. Then he did one of his graceful slides across the floor. The family cheered and clapped, which encouraged Fred to do more. Soon he was doing all his best moves, spins, slides, and even his special shimmy that made his doors rattle musically. The Johnson family danced with Fred for almost an hour. They learned to move out of his way when he wanted to spin, and they discovered that clapping in rhythm helped Fred keep time with the music. Even Mrs. Johnson, who usually didn't like loud noises, found herself laughing and enjoying Fred's enthusiastic dancing. From that night on, the Johnson family had regular dance parties with Fred. They would clear the kitchen, turn on music, and spend time dancing together. Tommy was especially good at dancing with Fred because he had been practicing for weeks. Word spread through the neighborhood about the Johnson family's dancing refrigerator. At first, people didn't believe it. But Mrs. Johnson started inviting friends over to see Fred's performances. Soon, Fred became famous throughout the town. A local newspaper reporter came to write a story about Fred, and a television news crew filmed him dancing for the evening news. Fred seemed to enjoy the attention, and he always performed his best moves when visitors came to see him. The story of Fred the Dancing Refrigerator spread beyond their town. People from other cities came to visit, and Fred appeared on several television shows. He even inspired other people to look for hidden talents in their own appliances, though no one ever found another dancing refrigerator quite like Fred. But Fred's favorite times were still the quiet evening dance parties with the Johnson family. They would dim the lights, play soft jazz music, and dance together in their kitchen. Tommy would do his small, careful steps. Sarah would try new moves she learned at school. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson would dance together the way they had when they were young, and Fred would slide and spin with joy. Fred learned that dancing wasn't just about moving to music. It was about sharing happiness with others and expressing the joy he felt inside. The Johnson family learned that extraordinary things could happen in the most ordinary places, and that sometimes the most wonderful surprises came from the things they saw every day but never really noticed. On quiet nights, when the music played softly and the family danced together, Fred felt like the luckiest refrigerator in the world. He had found his purpose beyond keeping food cold. He brought joy and laughter to the people he cared about. And in the morning, when Fred went back to his regular job of keeping food fresh, he would hum quietly to himself, already looking forward to the next time the music would play and he could dance again with his favorite family. The dancing refrigerator had taught the Johnson family that magic could be found anywhere, even in their own kitchen, and that the most important thing was to be open to wonder and joy, no matter how unexpected it might be.